Good day, everyone. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce myself. I am Miss Curly Birangas, a senior student here in Bohol Island State University, Calapi campus. I am a pre-service teacher under the care of Ma'am Saraya Eronico, and I was assigned in this subject, Contemporary World. Now, my lesson is about Lesson 9, the Global Demography. Now, are you ready? Okay, now let's go. So when couple are asked why they have children, their answers are almost always about their feelings. For most, having a child is the symbol for a successful union. It also ensures that the family will have a successor generation that will continue its name. The kinship is preserved and the family story continues. A few, however, worry how much a strange child can bring to the household as he or she competes for the parents' attention, and in reverse, how much energy the family needs to shower its love to an additional member. Viewed from above, however, having or not having children is mainly driven by economics. Behind the laughter or the tears lies the question: will the children be an economic asset or a burden to the family? Rural communities often welcome an extra hand to help in crop cultivation, particularly during planting and harvesting seasons. So the poorer districts of urban centers also tend to have families with more children because the success of their small family business depends on how many of their members can be hawking their wares on the streets. Hence, the more children, the better it will be for the farm or small by the street corner enterprises. Professional families with two incomes, however, these are just one or two progenies. So with each partner tied down or committed to his or her respective professions, neither has the time to devote to having a child or a kid, much more parenting. So these families also have their sights on long-term savings plans. They set aside significant parts of their incomes for their retirement, healthcare, and the future education of their child or children. Rural families view multiple children and large kinship networks as critical investments. Children, for example, can take over the agricultural work. Their houses can also become the retirement homes of their parents, who will then proceed to take care of their grandchildren. Urban families, however, may not have the same kinship network anymore because couples live on their own or because they move out of the farmlands. Thus, it is usually the basic family unit that is left to deal with life's challenges on its own. So these differing versions of family life determine the economic and social policies that countries craft regarding their respective populations. So countries in the less developed regions of the world that rely on agriculture tend to maintain high levels of population growth. The 1980 United Nations report on urban and rural population growth states that these areas contain 85% of the world rural population in 1975 and are projected to contain 90% by the end of the 20th century. So since then, global agricultural population has declined. In 2011, it accounted for over 37% of the total world population, compared to the statistics in 1980, in which rural and urban population percentages were more or less the same. So the blog site Nourishing the Planet, however, noted that even as the agricultural population shrunk as a share of total population between 1980 and 2011, it grew numerically from 2.2 billion to 2.6 billion people during this period. So urban populations have grown, but not necessarily because families are having more children. It's rather the combination of the natural outcome of significant migrations to the cities by people seeking work in the modern or the more modern sectors of society. So these movements or movement of people is especially manifest in the developing countries where industries and businesses in the cities are attracting people from the rural areas. So this trend has been noticeable since the year 1950s, with the pace accelerating in the next half a century. So by the start of the 21st century, the world had become 44% urban, while the corresponding figures for developed countries are 52% to 75%. Of course, we are living in a rural area or just a province. So you really, after you graduate, you really need to go and migrate to the other places where you can find a job or a better money to sustain your family needs, right? So international migration also plays a part. So today, 191 million people live in the countries or in countries other than their own. So imagine, so the United Nations projects that over 2.2 million will move from the developing world to the first world class countries. More on this in lesson 2. So countries welcome immigrants as they offset the debilitating effects of an aging population. But they are also perceived as threats to the job market because they compete against citizens for jobs and often have the edge because they are open to receiving lower wages. So voters' pressure has often constrained their governments to institute stricter immigration policies. So when you're going to migrate into something which has higher wages than our provinces, so it's just like you're really seeking, even though it's not that big, as long as you are earning money, so you are just going to take the risk, right? Next is the perils of overpopulation. So do you think our country is already an overpopulated one? So as we all know, China is one of the biggest country that has big population at the same time. So development planners see urbanization and industrialization as indicators of a developing society, but disagree on the role of population growth or decline in modernization. So this lengthy discussion brings back ideas of British scholar Thomas Malthus, who warned in his 1978 an essay on the principle of population that population growth will inevitably exhaust world food supply by the middle of the 19th century. Malthus' prediction was off pace, but it was revived in the late 1960s when American biologist Paul R. Ehrlich and his wife Anne wrote The Population Bomb, which argued that overpopulation in the 1970s and the 1980s will bring about global environmental disasters that would in turn lead to food shortage and mass starvation. So they proposed that countries like the United States take the lead in the promotion of global population control in order to reduce the growth rate to zero. So their recommendations range from the bizarre chemical castration to the policy-oriented or taxing an additional child and luxury taxes on child-related products to monetary incentives paying off men who would agree to be sterilized after 2 children, to institution building or a powerful department of population and environment. So there was some reason for this fear to persist. The rate of global population increase was at its highest between 1955 and 1975, when nations were finally able to return to normalcy after the devastations brought by the World War II. So the growth rate rose from 1.8% per year from 1955 to 1975, peaking at 2.06% annual growth rate between 1965 and 1970. By limiting the population, vital resources could be used for economic progress and not be diverted and wasted to feeding more mouth. So This argument became the basis of government population control programs worldwide in the middle 20th century. The Philippines, China, and India sought to lower birth rates on the belief that unless controlled, the free expansion of family members would lead to a crisis in resources, which in turn may result in widespread poverty, mass hunger, and political instability. As early as 1958, the American policy journal Foreign Affairs had already advocated contraception and sterilization as a practical solution to global economic, social, and political problems. So while there have been criticisms that challenge this argument, it persists even this very day. So in May 2009, a group of American billionaires warned of how a nightmarish explosion of people was a potentially disastrous environmental, social, and industrial threat to the world. So this worry is likewise at the core of the economist argument for the promotion of reproductive health. So advocates of the population control contend to universal access to reproductive technologies such as condoms, the pill, abortion, and vasectomy, and more importantly, giving women the right to choose between to have a children or not. So they see these tools as crucial to their national's development. Thus, in Puerto Rico, reproductive health supporters regard their work as the task transforming their poor country into a modern nation. Finally, politics determine these birth control programs. Developed countries justify their support for population control in developing countries by depicting the latter as conservative societies. For instance, population experts blame the irresponsible fecundity of Egyptians for that nations run on population growth, and the Iranian peasants' natural libidinal tendencies for the same rise in population. So from 1920 onwards, the Indian government marked lowercase, working poor, and Muslims as hypersexual and hyperfecund, and hence a drain on national resources. These policy formulations lead to extreme policies like the forced sterilization of 20 million violators of the Chinese government's one-child policy. So are you familiar with the one-child policy in China? So I also have heard that one. So Vietnam and Mexico also conducted coercive mass sterilization. So it's the economy, not the babies. So the use of population control to prevent economic crisis and its critics. For example, Bestie Hartman disagrees with the advocates of neo-Malthusian theory and accused governments of using population control as a substitute for social justice and much needed reforms such as land distribution, employment creation, provision of mass education and healthcare, and emancipation. So others pointed out that the population did grow fast in many countries in the 1960s, and this growth aided economic development by spurring technological and institutional innovation and increasing the supply of human ingenuity. So they acknowledge the shift in population from the rural to the urban areas, 52% to 75% in the developing world since the 1950s. So they likewise noted that while these megacities are now clusters in which income disparities along with transportation, housing, air pollution, and waste management. So these are major problems. They also have become and continue to be centers of economic growth and activity. So the median of 29.4 years for females and 30.9 for males in the cities means a young working population. So with this median age, states are assured that they have a robust military force, according to two population experts. So, as a country's baby boom generation gets older, for a time it constitutes a large cohort group of working age individuals and later a large cohort of elderly people. In all circumstances, there are also reasons to think that this very dynamic age structure will have economic consequences. Historically high proportion of working age individuals in population means that potentially there are more workers per dependent than previously. Production can therefore increase relative to consumption, and GDP capita can receive a boost. So the productive capacities of this generation are especially high in regions like East Asia, as Asia's remarkable growth in the past half century coincided closely with the demographic change in the region. So, as infant mortality fell from the 181 to 34 per 1,000 births between 1950 and 2000. So fertility fell from 6 to 2 children per woman or a woman. So the lag between falls into mortality and fertility created a baby boom generation between the 1965 and 1990. So the region's working age population grew nearly 4 times faster than the dependent population. So several studies have estimated that this demographic shift was responsible for 1/3 of East Asia's economic growth during the period, or a welcome demographic dividend. So population growth has also, to call this one, has also in fact spurred technological and institutional innovation and increased the supply of human ingenuity. Advances in agricultural production have shown that the Malthusian nightmare can be prevented. So the Green Revolution created high-yielding varieties of rice and other cereals, and along with the development of new methods of cultivation, increased yields globally, but more particularly in the developing world. So the global famine that neo-Malthusians predicted did not happen. So instead, between 1950 and 1984, global grain production increased by over 250%, so allowing agriculture to keep pace with population growth, thereby keeping global famine under control. So lately, a middle ground emerged between these two extremes. Scholars and policymakers agree with the neo-Malthusians, but suggest that if governments pursue population control programs, they must include more inclusive growth and greener economic growth at the same time. So next is women and reproductive rights. So the character in the middle of these debates, women, is often the subject of these population measures. Reproductive rights supporters argue that if population control and economic development were to reach their goals, women must have control over whether they will have children or not, and when they will have their progenies, if any. By giving women this power, they will be able to pursue their vocations, be they economic, social, or political, and contribute to economic growth. So it's just like a women empowerment. We girls, we women has the right to do whatever we want as a profession. So we have the rights to choose either we are going to have a children or not. So this serial correlation between fertility, family, and fortune has motivated countries with growing economies to introduce or strengthen the reproductive health laws, so including abortions. Are you familiar with abortion? I believe. So high income first world nations and fast developing countries were able to sustain growth in part because women were given the power to choose and easy access to reproductive technologies. So in North America and Europe, 73% of governments allow abortion upon a mother's request. So here in our country, Philippines, we are not allowed to have abortion, but I have known a lot of people who are doing that one. I don't know, probably because it's their choice. So I don't have any rights to judge them at the same time. So it's their choice. So just like the other country in North America and Europe, so they're allowed to have abortion upon a mother's request. So moreover, the more educated a woman is, the better are her prospects of improving her economic position. So you are not just a woman, but you are a woman. Remember that? So women can spend most of the time pursuing either their higher education of their careers or their careers instead of forcibly reducing this time to take care of their children. So most of the women, we're just gonna have to think that they must do the household chores, they must just stay at home, but not all the time. We women can also do a lot of things. We can be this kind of people who can lead the country, who can do whatever we want in the economic growth. So it's not just only boys, it's also us women. So most countries implement reproductive health laws because they worry about the health of the mothers or the mother. So in 1960, Bolivia's average total fertility rate, or the TFR, was 6.7 children. So in 1978, the Bolivian government put into effect a family planning program that included the legalization of abortion. So after noticing a spike in unsafe abortion and maternal death, so by 1985, the TFR rate went down to 5.13 and further declined to 3.46 in 2008. So a similar pattern occurred in Ghana after the government expanded reproductive health laws out of the same concern as that the Bolivian government. So it's not that very healthy, or it can cause risk to our women out there. So as a result, fertility declined steeply and continued to decline in 1994 or after 1994. So, such examples seem to draw the attention of other countries at the same time. So, thus, in 2014, the United Nations report noted that the proportion of countries allowing abortion to preserve the physical health of a woman increased from 63% to 67%, and those to preserve the mental health of a woman increased from 52% to 64%. So opponents regard reproductive rights as nothing but a false front for abortion. So they contend that this method of preventing conception endangers the life of the mother and must be banned. So the religious wing of the anti-reproductive rights flank goes further and describes abortion as the debauchery that sullies the name of God. It will send the mother to hell and prevents a new soul, which is the baby, to become human. So this position was politically powerful, one partly because various parts of the developing world remain very conservative, just like us in our country, Philippines. So, and failing pressures by Christian groups compelled the governments of Poland's Croatia, Hungary, Yugoslavia, and even Russia to impose restrictive reproductive health programs. So including making access to condoms and other technologies difficult. So Muslim countries do not condone abortion and limit wives to domestic chores and delivering babies. Senegal only allows abortion when the mother's life is threatened. So the Philippines, with a Catholic majority, so now has a reproductive health law in place. But conservative politicians have enfeebled it through budget cuts and stalled its implementation by filing a case against the law in the Supreme Court. So a country being industrialized and developed, however, does not automatically assure pro-women reproductive regulations. So in the United States, the women's movement of the 1960s was responsible for the passage and judicial endorsements of pro-choice law, but conservatives controlling state legislators have also also slowly undermined this law by imposing restrictions on women's access to abortion. So while pro-choice advocates argue that abortion is necessary to protect the health of the mother, their conservative rivals shift the focus on the death of the fetus in the mother's womb as the reason for reversing the law. So this battle continues to be played out in all political arenas in the United States. Next is the feminist perspective. So, feminists approach the issue of reproductive rights from another angle. They are foremost against any form of population control because they are compulsory by nature, resorting to a carrot and stick approach. Punitive mechanisms coexist alongside benefits. So that actually does not empower women. They believe that government assumptions that poverty and environmental degradation are caused by overpopulation are wrong. These factors ignore other equally important causes like the unequal distribution of wealth, the lack of public safety nets like universal health care, education, and gender inequality programs. Feminists also point out that there is very little evidence that point to overpopulation as the culprit behind poverty and, of course, ecological devastation. So governments have not directly responded to these criticisms, but one of the goals of the 1994 United Nations International Conference on Population and Development suggests recognitions of these issues. So, country representatives to that conference agreed that women should receive family planning counseling on abortions and dangers of sexuality or sexually transmitted diseases, the nature of human sexuality, and the main elements of responsible parenthood. However, the conference also left it to the individual countries to determine how this recommendation can be turned into programs. Hence, globally, women's and feminist arguments on reproductive rights and overpopulations are acknowledged, but the struggle to turn them into policy is still fought at the national level. So it is the dilemma that women and feminist movements face today. And lastly is the most amazing part, which is the population growth and food security. So today's global population has reached 7.4 billion. Imagine that huge number. And it is estimated to increase to 9.5 billion in 2050. Oh my goodness. Then in 11.2 billion by 2100. So imagine, could you reach that kind of age? Then the median age of this population is a 30.1, with the male median age at 29.4 years and female 30.9 years. So 95% of this population growth will happen in developing countries, with demographers predicting that by the middle of this century, several countries will have tripled their population. So probably Philippines will triple their, or this country would triple our population. Let's just see the next few years. So the opposite is happening in the developed world, where populations remain steady in general but declining in some of the most advanced countries such as Japan and Singapore. However, this scenario is not a runoff that could get out of control. So demographers predict that the world population will stabilize by 2050 to 9 billion, although they warn that feeding this population will be an immense challenge. So the government will probably gonna have the most challenging um, part. So good luck to the future president. So the decline in fertility and the existence of young reproductive population, however, may not be enough to offset this concern over food security. So the Food and Agriculture Organization, or FAO, warns that in order for countries to mitigate the impact of population growth, food production must increase by 70%. It is an annual cereal production must rise to 3 billion tons from the current 2.1 billion, and yearly meat production must go up to 200 million tons to reach 470 million. So the problem here is that the global rate of growth of cereals has or had declined considerably from 3.2% in 1960 to just 1.5% in 2000. What about now? What about this year, 2022? So probably we're gonna have some research for that about the growth of cereals. So the FAO recommends that countries increase their investments in agriculture, craft long-term policies aimed at fighting poverty, and invest in research and development. So the UN body also suggests that countries develop a comprehensive social service program that includes food assistance, consistent delivery of health services, and education, especially for the poor. So as of now, we already have So as of now, we already have this free tuition in the university, especially here in Bohol Island State University, Calapi campus, in which we are all the students and we all benefit in this free education. And it is an honor and pleasure for us to study in this kind of great university, spending nothing but only sacrifices and intelligence that we need to solve and sharpen. Okay, so if domestic production is not enough, it becomes essential for nations to import, of course. So the Food Agriculture Organization therefore enjoins governments to keep their markets open and to eventually move towards a global trading system that is fair and competitive and that contributes to a dependable market for food. So the aforementioned above or the aforementioned are worthy recommendations, but nations the aforementioned are worthy recommendations, but nation states shall need political will to push through these sweeping changes in population growth and food security. So this will take some time to happen, given that good governance is also a goal that many nations, especially in the developing world, have yet to attain. So if you have questions and clarifications, don't you ever hesitate to ask me on my Facebook account, Girly Young, or ask me in the group chat so that you can ask me a further question if you don't understand my discussion. So for your activity, it is already given in your Google Classroom. So thank you for listening for the long discussions that we had this day. So God bless and goodbye. See you soon.